So hello, it's only me standing between you and your lunch. I better be good. Without further ado, let me get started. What I will be speaking about is how to arrive at lasting change, especially in conflicting environments. Because what we all know from our experience, I suppose, is that if you embark in change, in most cases, it won't be an easy job. So there are some lessons learned. I have to confess most of them in Vienna. This is why I have gray hair here, but also elsewhere. And I'll do my best to share them with you within 20 minutes. So let's do it. I started with this slide. This is a square in Vienna. You could call it a square. It used to be a non-place, actually. On the background, you have, so behind my back when I took this picture, you have a train station, a railway station, and a metro station. And the square is, and used to be by all means, ugly. So it was the kind of place where nobody would ever go. Plus, you have several lanes of cars driving around it. And a couple of years ago, with this very, very simple intervention, I mean, look at it, it's not posh, right? It's not newly designed. It's just introducing water play and child play. And by just doing this, the face of the place has changed. It's a place now. And the most lovely thing about it is that on hot summer days, you will also experience not only children playing there, but also adults exiting the station and playing with water. Now, this said, okay, I would like it to work, but yes. We're all experiencing major change in our cities. And there are several game changers. I'll start with 4, demographic growth, leading to aging population, but also predominantly, in many cases due to migration, to many young families with children, so a growing number of young adults and children. We have the housing crisis, not only in terms of affordability and availability, but also in terms of occupancy rates. We all know the phenomenon of empty units, or, yes, constructions in our cities. We have the climate crisis, mass migration, and yet another 4 urban game changers, I would say. It's decarbonization, also an opportunity for major transformation in our cities. It's social and cultural change that, if not anything else, leads also to a trend of spending time outdoors and enjoying outdoor lives, putting pressure on public space in a positive sense. That's an opportunity. It's global tourism that, at worst, may lead to what I call the Disneylandization of cities and Airbnb. But if you move towards immersion tourism, it's an opportunity for economic growth, placemaking, local urban development in parts of the city where nobody has been going up to now. And last but not least, it's democracy change, which has one huge opportunity for us all. And that is people actually requesting that they be part of it, requesting that they be involved. So the big chance here is activation and collaboration. The core problem is, to put it in simple terms, how do you put these things together? In many cases, vision comes from the top. It's, in many cases, visionary leadership. And don't get me wrong, I don't mean it only in the hierarchical sense. You can think of it also as vertical leadership. But even, horizontal leadership. So each and every one of us is a leader in some sense at some point in time. But mostly, vision is something that starts in one's head, let's put it this way, and then you have to make it collective. You have to share it with others. Whereas innovation, change, comes from the entire ecosystem. So you have to somehow find a way, figure a way to make these things match together somewhere in the middle, especially when you're trying, of course, to produce at a mass scale, at a big scale change in cities. Yes, so last but not least, Here we have some examples of the cities we come from, the places we deal with, and where cities might be heading. They may be bubble cities without gates or with gates. They may be integrating cities where everybody has a place. We have an excellent example here, top right, Vienna, where you can actually see a place where you have a high diversity and high inclusion power, I would say. And then you may have places where there are no gates, and theoretically you could go anywhere, yet you can actually see how exclusion works. And at the same time, we have controversy, as I mentioned it before. So here's an example of middle-income people from a well-off neighborhood demonstrating against a bus, actually, a bus lane. And here, in the same year, more or less, 1 year later, is another way to use the street. Middle-income area, small community grant, enabling this neighborhood to actually organize themselves this long breakfast, where they come together regularly to actually produce community and strengthen ties and work against isolation. This said, how do we manage transitions where we want to head at? 10 lessons. Let's see if I can share them in 13 minutes. Lesson number 1, start with children. Why start with children? By the way, the mayor of Bratislava has started lately a global alliance of mayors who wish to start with children. Why? Why start with children? Well, I say because what we long for our children is what we long for ourselves as well. We want them to grow up in a healthy and safe environment. We want them to be able to move around freely, to play, to have access to nature, to play with water, right? And all of these things are things that we love ourselves. Which is why young couples, when they know that the first child is arriving, most probably will say, now we have to move to the suburbs or buy a little house in the countryside so that our children can have a happy childhood. And then they end up spending most of their life in a car, trying to bring the kids to school, trying to arrive at work, etc., etc. So we have to provide these qualities at the heart, at the very heart of our city. And if we take this as a guiding principle, no matter where we are, no matter what we do, we can arrive at lasting change. So here's an example from Vienna. The idea is to keep in mind a city that's good for children is good for us all. Here's a small street in Vienna, the way it looked like 3 years before. It just took a couple of months, and this is what it looks like today. And here's an example from Milan, working with color. Very simple means. And the other example is, by the way, Longueuil by Montreal. And here's an example from Barcelona, the superblocks in Barcelona. And here's an example from Vienna, in front of a school, the first superblock in Vienna, in front of a school. Which takes me to lesson number 2. Use new urban quarters as an opportunity. Now, this is not also an image chosen by coincidence. The lake is artificial. And the buildings you see in the backdrop are social housing, very high quality social housing. Okay, Vienna has a policy that prescribes 2/3 of all units in all larger developments need to be mandatorily subsidized housing. It need not be that much. It can be 20%, it can be 25%, it can be 15%, it can be 30%, but it needs to be there. The reason, though, why I have chosen this lesson, let's put it this way, using them as an opportunity, does not only have to do with introducing affordable housing or with introducing green spaces. You can do something very simple. Just forget about conventional streets. forget about the greed. Why not make every street inside a new urban quarter a living street? A street for life, a street for people to walk and spend time outdoors. So this is, by the way, a development where you have shared space. That means the cars are allowed at a very low speed, but the street is there predominantly for life. And here's an opportunity for lasting change. Now, lesson number 3, create images and experiences. Why on earth, when we embark in lasting change, in conflicting environments, we tend to forget about how do we let people experience the place in a different way so that we can win support, gain support for what we're trying to do? I would say one of the basics of embarking in change, especially when it comes to public space, is to produce opportunities for people to experience it in a different way. Which means, yes, you need to invest in whatever kind of events, festivities, etc., working together with local communities, with local shop owners, whatever it is that you can get. And here's an example of how this has been done in collaboration with local shop owners, to produce an image of the street as a theater, as a place where you can actually spend time, walk by, slow down, lower your pace, connect with others. But the basic idea is you may come up with 1 million ways to use the street differently. The message here is produce images. Change the way, change the perception of a place. Lesson number 5, brace for controversy. I'm not saying look for controversy. I mean, if you can really have, why would I stand here and say, you know, go for it, okay? But it will come. So if you want to change a place, you have to expect fierce controversy and not fear it, brace for it, expect it. And that means prepare. I was unprepared. This is what happened to me, right? But I have been showing you this street. This is the way it looked like back in 2013. This is what happened in the middle. This is what it looks like today. Thanks for that, we ended up knocking on 13,000 doors in order to have a majority at the referendum, which enabled us to redo it. So the message is, if you expect that it will come, and not just hope that it won't, if you expect that it will be fierce, and not just hope that it won't be that bad, if you prepare for it, you may do campaigning, you may use images, as I told you before, and produce experiences. You may plan to knock on 30,000 doors. You may do many different things, but you have to go actively through it. And that takes me to lesson number 6. Focus on allies and alliances. What we tend to do is to focus on opposition and forget about alliances, especially in conflicting environments. But it's the other way around. Preparing for controversy means actively looking not just for stakeholders, but for possible allies. And there are always more allies than you think. In our case, we didn't think, example given, of real estate, who are a powerful ally when you try to redesign a street, because they will be benefiting from it, clearly. So do the math properly, look for allies. In this case, I promised Charles yesterday that I will be mentioning it, because it's also a story of, let's say, creative bureaucracy. We had people in the street that had started introducing plants and vertical greening in a very gray street with very narrow sidewalks. And then there were complaints because you're not allowed to put plants when the sidewalks are so narrow. And the decision was taken by administration that they need to take the plants out. And they were desperate. And by the way, the decision was correct, because you need to have enough space on a sidewalk for people to, push a pram or etc. So they arrived in my office, and I said, well, why don't we just get rid of the sidewalks? And that means turn the street into shared space. But please, you have to explain this to local community yourselves. And it's not going to be me explaining everything all the time to everybody. And suddenly it was magic. It meant that we were able to redo this street without controversy, without much of a discussion, just because they did it themselves. Lesson learned, there are always allies. Allies may be local communities, allies may be shop owners, allies, as I said, may be real estate owners. But focus on allies and work together with them. 7, change needs ecosystems. Again, it's not about just stakeholder analysis. It's about thinking in entire ecosystems. If they're there, collaborating with them. So partnerships, that was mentioned before today, I think several times. If they're not there, creating them, taking the time to build them up, but bringing the entire ecosystem together to produce lasting change. In this case, this is the way the street looked like before. Real estate came together, organized the entire ecosystem in a wonderful process, I have to say, paid 50% of the cost for redesigning it, and this is what it looks like today, meanwhile. But there are other examples. There are numerous examples where we can actually learn and replicate. So let me show you this wonderful image from Athens, where we all know that there are medium-sized corporates who, example given because of their corporate social responsibility schemes, need to embark in sustainable change and support projects, but they're not that big that they already would have their own foundations, example given. So in this case, this is a wonderful collaboration between medium-sized corporates and a local NGO, who will then involve the entire community, specifically the children, to create pocket parks throughout Athens. So this is a small gardens and pocket parks example. These are the results that may come out of it, and that takes me to number 8, public-plural partnerships. I think we talk a lot about public-private partnerships, and there's a reason to it. But if we're thinking of lasting change, of spreading change, I would like to talk a tiny bit about public-plural partnerships. There may be the public hand there may be individuals there may be small shop owners there. You can think of it in many different ways. In the case of Vienna, it was and is in the last years, example given a small community grant scheme where everybody can have a small amount of money. If they have an idea to do something in their own neighborhood, street corner, an underused small space in their area, the only precondition is that it has to be open for everybody to use without having to pay entrance or without having to consume. So look at the things that have evolved out of it. There are more than 500 meanwhile. So it's spreading all over the city. And 10 years of successful citizen involvement, these are citizen solar power plants. So you have a municipal company who is organizing construction and managing, operating it, but it belongs to the people. And everybody can be a shareholder. It takes as little as 50 euro, and maximum is 10,000 euro, and you can be part of it. Now, this is just another example, like we have energy communities spreading across Europe right now. But in this case, it's special because we're talking power plants, and we're talking about different ways of arriving at large-scale sustainable change. So here were some examples of the communities grant scheme that I have been mentioning before, so things can be as simple as this. Summer child play streets, very simple means, making the most of opportunities, of small corners. And lesson number 9, time's up, so I'll make, if you give me another 2 minutes. So, think big, act here. Use every opportunity. The idea is use new urban quarters, as I said before. Use whatever project you are dealing with in the city. Encourage small change, little projects here and there, community, but connect them. Think of them in a connected way, because it is networks that will actually create the impact. The impact comes from networks. That means realizing you need long-term plans, you need to create and involve entire ecosystems, but you actually need to break them down into small bits and pieces of action here and there, and to realize that small pieces of action, if they're not connected through a long-term plan, they don't make a difference. If there is a long-term plan, suddenly everything feeds into it. Which takes me to realizing that a city is a city of neighborhoods, and that adopting a neighborhood-oriented approach is not the best way to create lasting change in terms of local ecosystems involving local communities, creating great impact through even small-scale projects, but it also needs management. Now, here are some examples where you can see the kind of interventions that I'm talking about. 1,000 needle strategy, that's the motto here. But speaking of local management, a very good idea is to put in place, wherever possible, small management, local small management agencies that will help actually, well, steer all this, manage all this, in order not only to make it happen, but again, to arrive at sustainable long-term change. That means the lesson here is you also need some kind of governance and some kind of steering tools here. And the last one, get involvement right. So, who's missing here? Well, I would say women, for one thing. Perhaps younger people, perhaps families, perhaps children. This is a typical situation of how, in many cases, we go about involvement in our cities. It's at night, and it's in a public building. And this is when, or in the evening, and this is when younger people, women, etc., will never come. Do it the other way around. So it's not only about mobile involvement, going where people are, it is about involvement in terms of perhaps documenting what women said, what men said separately. This is an excellent example of a gender fair involvement process. And involve the children, so go where the children are, which is also an excellent example from involvement at a school, and as you can see, even the girls separately, to produce, by the way, a lovely new place in Vienna. So this said, I have to thank you, my time is over, and enjoy lunch.